This morning I want to talk about a topic that was sprung off a conversation with somebody that I've known for a long time that dropped off a donation at my house. It's actually my cousin who, but they dropped off a little donation for the church, not little, but a donation that seemed little to them. And she goes, Bob, I want this to go to Radiantfellowship. And, it was $100. All right. And so I said, thank you very much. This means a lot, and she goes, I know it's not much. I said, listen, in a small church, $100 is like handing a big church $1,000, because when your budget is $900 a week, you do the math. Okay. That makes up a substantial amount of, hitting that goal. And she goes, well, I just, again, she said it's not much, but it was one of those things that it hit me. And the church is something that I want to talk about specifically when less is more and finding value in a small church. All right. Now, in this talk, I want to be very clear that it's not that I'm talking about small churches because I'm content with being a small church. However, there are some real pros to being a small congregation, a small group of believers. So when that random gift came in, I can tell you that I can't speak for other churches, but there's a large church in our denomination in Wisconsin where their annual weekly operating budget is $44,000. All right. So sometimes the mindset, right, can go to the point of here's $100, and to them it's like a penny. Biblically speaking, thank you for all sorts of amounts, and there's biblical lessons there. People give what they can, but we have to look at small church and say, you know what? There's something to having a small church. There's something about embracing who we are, not being content with where we are, but where is God leading us to go in this area? Because churches come in all sizes. Okay. Some are large, some are medium, some are small, some are home churches, some are in the tens of thousands, some are in the single digits. A small church, according to the Barna report, is less than 200 members. That makes up 80% of churches in the United States. All right. A medium church has 201 to 400 members. That makes up 10% of the churches. And a large church has 401 plus members. That's 10% of churches. So that, I don't know where we all came from at one point or another. For me, that was my upbringing, 401 plus bracket back in Milwaukee, where I attended and grew up, not the church that I was on staff at. So we all come from different backgrounds and different churches. Maybe Radiant is your first church and this is all you know, and that's very cool as well. But for some, even 200 members can constitute a large church, but each size has its advantages, all right? Each church has its what they're really good at and what they can do. And obviously, the bigger the church, the bigger the events. We lay out 300 eggs in the backyard for Easter egg hunt. We're like, I'm shouting hallelujah. You get a mega church, they charter a helicopter and drop 10,000 eggs from a helicopter in an open field. They're cheering on, saying, awesome, great, awesome, that's good too. I have a buddy that pastors a mega church, and I've oftentimes said, if you ever want to take a love offering for us, it would pay off our church in one offering. I keep saying that to him, like, come on, man. We support Africa missionaries. Let's do something local, but we keep praying in that way. I keep heckling them. So, but my purpose isn't to encourage stagnation with this message. It's to remind us of the benefits and honestly, the obligations of having a small church in the community. It's evident that people need church. People need church. We live in a world that's broken. We live in a world where people need one another. We live in a world where truly that would be a good thing for people. Just this morning, we're at an intersection on Berlin and I think Lake, and the lady's crossing the street, and I've known her from here and there, but she didn't recognize me. She's walking past a car all disgruntled, and she looks at me and makes a snarl face. And the kids are like, what was that about? I'm like, I have no idea. It's just a bad day. And so it was just, people need to have a church community that they can be a part of. So there's benefits of a small church. There's a stronger sense of family in a smaller church. A small church is one where almost everyone knows each other. Face-to-face interaction, it's easy. They can be scary to some people as well. If they come from a larger church, a smaller church can be a little bit more intimidating because it's going to be one of those things where you're going to even probably bump into somebody in our massive size narthex, okay, lobby. And it's going to happen. When we have concerts here, when we had Honor and Glory here, I don't know how many phone calls I got saying, can you reserve, when we buy tickets, can we reserve front row seats? I'm like, you haven't been here before, have you? Every row is a front seat ticket to our concerts at this church. But I feel bad for those that say their church is like, you know, I guess you would put it this way. When people come to church, they experience what church is like. There are some that don't experience that, and they would rather stay home or go to, you know, I've seen the memes, you know, it shows the woods and everything, says this is my church and I feel at home, I feel close to God. I get that. I do too. When I'm out in the woods, I do that, but I would never call it my church because I'd rather get a hug from Sue than a tree. All right. You see what I mean? That can't be your church. That can't be. You can't congregate. You can't have conversation. You can't see how everybody's doing. And so a small church is one where it's easier to develop family relationships, a sense of family which is proper. In 1 Timothy 5:1-2, let me back up here. It says, do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. With a smaller church is an opportunity to have cross-generational lines where children learn to relate to others besides their peers. They see us and function with one another. They're gonna see us adults working at an Easter egg hunt or the candy carnival, or if we go on a mission trip somewhere, stateside or someday overseas. The younger see the older, and the older are rubbing shoulders with the younger because it's a tighter knit family. Where young and old benefit from each other's strengths. So just as much as the young people need us older folks to mentor them and all that, we need those younger ones around too, to keep us young, you know, to keep us laughing, to keep us, you know, even a little bit of a pulse on what's going on in kid culture these days. For teachers, they know that the culture of teens and kids today is way different than what our culture is. It truly is way different. And so we need the younger ones to keep us grounded. We can talk about our music groups. They'll talk about their music groups, and us older ones will always be like, your music stinks. And they'll be like, no, it's not. It's really good. And it's, you know, the age-old debate. But even biblically speaking, the family of God is a wonderful blessing, and a blessing most often experienced in smaller churches. Mark chapter 10:28-30 says, then Peter spoke up. We have left everything to follow you. Truly, I tell you, Jesus replied, no one who has left home or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for me and the gospel will fail to receive 100 times as much in the present age. Homes, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and fields, along with persecutions, and in the age to come, eternal life. The family of God is something to be experienced. And when you think of family, you think of a tight-knit, close group. In a small church, small churches can offer that tight-knit, close group where we know one another, where we experience joys and victories and sadnesses with one another. And there's greater opportunities to grow in a smaller church. There's a chance in a smaller church that we're more likely that we are needed. The roles to fulfill are not that much different than between large and small churches. They aren't. There's going to be ushers. There's going to be greeters. There's going to be a worship team. There's going to be kid workers. There's going to be people to lead the studies. But roles such as serving in public worship, Bible classes, etc., whether large or small, the number of teachers, preachers, song leaders that are needed is about the same. So the ratio of roles to members is usually much greater in small churches, simply because we do not have the large pool of members to choose from. Therefore, there's often a greater need in small churches. I've talked about before, there's that business principle where 80% of the work gets done by 20% of the people. That's true across the board. Now, in a smaller church, we oftentimes will say, well, as an example, Jeremy, why can't you do more? Well, the fact is he's already on worship team. He's helping with youth group. And so there's double roles there. And some of us may have a single role, a double role, a triple role. There's still the needs, but as a smaller church, more people wear more hats. And so more likely in a smaller church that we're used. There's joy in that. There's joy in being used by the church, to being used by God in the church to do different things. I can tell you that when we go through a mountaintop experience or we're down in the trenches of life, serving is a way to pull ourselves up out of that area. Sometimes when we've gone to Nashville before, per se, on our stateside missions trips to help repair some of the whatever needs to be repaired at Sanctuary, sometimes we've gone there, we've taken people there that are really actually down in the dumps. But when they come back, they're full of life again. They're full of vigor. Why? Because there's something very biblical about that. To serve, to get our minds off of things, to get our eyes on other places. The same applies to church. Showing up and helping with an outreach, it brings us up. I'll never forget our first candy carnival was at the old Walgreens location next to Piggly Wiggly. And one of the people that served there said, even if we don't get anybody from this in our church, it's just rewarding to know that you did something, that we did something to serve people, to get out there and plant a seed. So it's more likely that we're used. Smaller churches use those willing to serve much more frequently, out of necessity at times, like today. We have a broken hot water heater. That's necessity. But other times it's just, hey, whoever can make it, we're going to be doing this event. We'd love to have you. But sometimes it's out of necessity. Small churches are often the training ground where leaders for large churches develop their skills. Isn't that true? Many of our biggest name pastors that we've seen, Billy Graham came from a small church. Many others came from a smaller church. A pastor that pastored the largest church in all of the world, that has recently passed away, Pastor Yang Cho in China, pastored the world's largest church, started in humble beginnings. Look at some of the people we listen to on Christian radio. They've all come from humble beginnings. I can tell you Danny Goki came from the church where I was youth pastoring before me, but that was his upbringing. Over and over again, there were many that came from small beginnings. Wayne, this one's for you. Elvis. He came from a small little Assembly of God church in Tupelo, Mississippi, and rose to that. And so I say all of that because a lot of times this is where we get our start. Some may move on to other things, but at the same time, we can also sit back and say, what a joy it is to serve with one another. And you know what? It's more likely that you're missed. It's more likely that you're missed. If you're gone for even 2 weeks, I'm sending you a message. This is how it is. We don't have attendance sheets or anything like that you got to check into every Sunday. Why? Because we're a small church. When you're gone, I'm going to do my best to try to get a hold of you if I have your contact information. One's absence is more keenly felt in a small church, especially when needed to fulfill a certain role. When we need people, we put the need out there. One's absence can be overlooked for several weeks in a larger church, maybe sometimes for a long time. I've heard some of your stories. I've heard of people that have come and maybe have come to this church. And you've told me, it's been 3 months since I've been there, and now I just got a phone call. Where have I been? You can't blame the larger churches, because if they don't have something in place, then they're dealing with a lot of people. I'm just saying in a smaller church, it's kind of a fringe benefit of being a part of a smaller church. If you're family cares for each other, and we're going to reach out and see if you're okay or not. For those needing encouragement, this is important to know that we're missed. It's too easy to get lost in a crowd. We need those who will take notice when we begin to show signs of weakness. That's what I so appreciate about all of you. When you see a fellow person in the church that, you have a connection with starting to struggle, I know that you've reached out. I know that you've reached out to them and asked if you can help them. I've seen it. I've heard of stories. And that's pretty good indicator that we're a healthy church. When you hear of people in the church reaching out to others, and I know this happens in all churches, and a lot of pastors are very proud of that. Just to be able to hear that, you know what? The pastor is not the only one that has to minister. We're all ministers according to Scripture, and we're ministering to one another. So for those that need encouragement, this is important. We need those who will take notice when we begin to show signs of weakness. Someone that looks at you and says, we have the rapport, basically, what's going on in your life? How can I help you? What can I pray with you for? Can we go get a coffee? In Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 through 2, it says, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you may also be tempted. Carry each other's burdens. In this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ. To restore them gently, to reach out to them, say, I see you're struggling. If you don't know them very well, the approach would be, how are you doing? And you've had a lot of people come up to you and say that over the years. But you know what ones stand out in my mind? Are the ones that are closer to me, and I say good to that question. But then they ask the question in a different way. How are you doing? That's when it pierces. And you realize this is somebody I can confide in. This is somebody that really cares about me. See, that's the joy of a small church. We notice things. Maybe not on a Sunday morning. All of a sudden you see their social media feed. Some of the things they're saying, some of the, they've been absent for a little while. You can reach out to them because you've noticed they've been absent. Of course, there's many things a large church can do that a small church cannot, but small churches have their benefits, and we need to appreciate them. They also have their obligations. The obligations of a small church, let me back up here. I'm sorry, I didn't sneak that one in. But the obligations of a small church, you'll see that point on your outline, is that is to nurture a sense of family. Congregationally, providing opportunities for spiritual fellowship. So I'm going to be gone next week. So the add-on to that announcement is we're going to do potluck and board meeting and all that the following week. Communion and all of that. Why? Well, selfishly, I want to be there. I enjoy a good tater tot casserole, which we haven't had in a long time. So if anybody wants to step up, go for it. No, no, but we have fellowship time. That's important. These things, there's a spiritual bond that happens. Think of your own house. When you have people over to your house, if you were to sit around and watch Gold Rush and eat your meal and all that, yeah, you're having a good time and you're having conversation. But when you sit around the table, there's something else that happens, isn't there? There's something else that takes place because you're breaking bread with one another. And there's something very profound about that, to have that intimacy with one another. Other forms of spiritual fellowship is visitation programs to encourage the weak, to minister to the sick. Admittedly, it takes a special type of person to do that. Sometimes I'll get somebody who will say, if you have anybody that's sick, anybody that needs prayer, call me, I'll go visit with them. And my next question would be then is, do you know who they are? Nope, but they're part of our church family, I'll go visit with them. It takes a special type of person to do that. A little more of an extrovert. But those are all roles of what a church does. When I hear of when somebody calls and says, I need a visit, I'm going to do my best to get there and visit with them. And I know a lot of us do that as well. So congregationally, those are the things we can do. Individually, by providing opportunities for hospitality, inviting others into our home, going out together. One couple calling another couple saying, let's go on a double date. Valentine's that party. We're going to go hang out, have a good time, and fellowship with one another. Getting together for social occasions. These are all ways that we build the family bond within the church. I would like to believe that just on a Sunday morning, we would grow to know each other, and we do, because we provide a time of fellowship once a month and all that. But when we get out and get to know each other beyond the church building, something else begins to happen. You get to know each other even on a more personal level. We haven't done one in a while, Dave, but our Gander Mountain, or our Cabela's trips. Once in a while, a guy would go with us that has normally not attended very much here. And by the end of that trip, we're like best buds. We're having conversation, we're laughing, we're all of that. But the obligation of a small church also falls on its leadership, is that we have to provide opportunities for growth. Training those willing to learn and serve, such as men's ministry, women's ministry, preaching, on a Sunday morning, teaching on our Tuesday nights, and as we look at doing a small group. These are important times that we, as a church, the leadership has to take responsibility to provide avenues for you as well to grow in your faith. Utilizing those willing to develop their abilities and talents, providing opportunities for men willing to teach and lead and be on the worship team, and likewise for women to do the same thing. I can tell you firsthand that you're in a church that's part of a fellowship, the Assemblies of God, that celebrates women ministers. They credential them. I realize some places don't, and that's okay. I mean, that's a doctrinal issue. But you're in a place that that if it ever came across a lady's mind saying, I don't know if I'm allowed to teach here, you are wholeheartedly allowed to teach here. Very strong theological basis that maybe I'll base a sermon off of sometime in a textual kind of way about how women were used over and over again in the Old Testament. Look at Ruth, a judge, all of these things. They're on and on it goes. But we should not feel that a preacher is basically negating his duties when he opens his pulpit for others to speak. In a small church, you will get guest speakers. Why? Because there is no other staff. And so in a larger church, you're going to say, hey, youth pastor is speaking this weekend, music minister is speaking this weekend, they're the different pastors of a church. And so it doesn't seem like the pastor is gone very much because he's there. In a smaller church, you know what? I'm going to bring Joel Pavey in. He's going to be the guest speaker so I can be gone for a weekend, and so there will be seasons like that where it's like, wow, what's with all the guest speakers? Is pastor out itinerating somewhere? No. You've heard me say it once, you heard me say it 1,000 times. We're celebrating 20 years this year. Let's celebrate another 20 together. Okay. Then I'll hand it off to Noah, or James. So good luck. But, no, it's going to be a lot of ice cream socials. That's for sure. But we shouldn't feel that that's the case. But the fact is, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2 says, and the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people will also be qualified to teach others. This is a church that when I hear something that God's doing in your life, I will sometimes talk to that person and say, will you tag team the message with me? Because the church needs to hear what you just went through and what you're celebrating as one of victories that God has brought you through. We need to be open to learn from one another. We need to be able to be open to hear stories and testimonies and all of those things of what God's done in your life. And so this church wants to provide opportunities for that. But the key thing that we need to watch for in a small church is stagnation. Stagnation is a terrible thing in the life of a church. You ever been to Freighter in Milwaukee? Okay. On Wisconsin Avenue at Freighter Hospital, there's 3 ponds. Okay, right on Wisconsin Avenue there. That was mine, my brothers, Mario, all of these guys. We would go there and just fish that pond constantly. You never caught a bluegill much bigger than that. Why? Because the pond, the what was then called the medical complex ponds, was known as stagnated water. There was nothing that's going to grow bigger than that in those ponds. There was no life coming in. Things were leaving, but what was there, it's just all the same. That's a real danger for any church, is stagnation. It's tempting to want to remain small because you do get the family feel. You do have these moments where everybody knows each other. It's warmth, it's friendly, but the Lord does expect us to grow. In Matthew chapter 13, 31 through 32, it says, he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it's the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. When we have faith, it's going to grow. When we have a church, it should be growing. In John chapter 15, verses 1 through 2, it says, I am the vine and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. So we shouldn't, as a small church, I know I'm not as a pastor, I know many of us aren't either, we should never be content to remain small. We've seen this church over the last 20 years to the point where we added a Saturday night service for a season. And we've also seen it way smaller than what it is now. This is the ebb and flow of churches. Bigger churches, you don't see it as much. Smaller churches, it's a normal thing. It's a life cycle of a church. But through it all, we should never be content with where it's at. We should be seeking to grow both as individuals and as a congregation. If we're not in the upward spiral of growth, then we're likely heading downward. And that's a place we don't want to go. That's a place we don't want to be. Again, there are advantages to different sizes in congregations. My point has not been to suggest one size is superior to another. That's simply not the case. I can walk into a large church and cheer them on and say, good for you. Way to go. In fact, I look at the other side of it saying, how are you doing this? Like we look at a church where people are like, I feel at home in this church and it's massive. I'm looking at it like, okay, who is the person that's organizing everything to have their group of people that they're following up on so that this large church, actually people are coming in and saying, I feel at home here. To me, I celebrate that. As a small church, also, we look at it and we say, wow, there's something really cool going on here. There's something that's really exciting that's going on here. My purpose of this message has been to ensure we do not let smallness become a hindrance. As a small congregation, we need to focus on our strengths, which could lead to growth. If we don't, we're likely to stagnate, and that's not a good thing. So I encourage us to focus on our strengths. Focus on what we do. Could we add programs left and right all day long? Yes, we could. But you'd get a couple things. You get a burnt out church because pastor keeps asking them to lead something, to be a part of something, and you're going to get a burnt out pastor. Rather, embrace what we have, move forward, understanding we're not okay with where we are. We want to grow. A church should grow. But at the same time, recognizing what God's given us. And that's a fantastic community of believers. To focus on our strengths, and it's more likely we will remain healthy when we become a larger congregation. Amen? It's a good thing we have going here. It really is. Some of us have been here many years. Some of us are new. Some that are watching online. There's people that they live in other areas, but they're faithfully watching online every week. We don't know the reach we have, but it's worth celebrating. This little church, man, I tell you the history of it when it first got going. It's an exciting thing, and I'm thankful for each and every one of you. And as we look around the room, we should be thankful for each and every one of us, because we're this family called Radiant Fellowship.